Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of Strokecast. I'm Bill Monroe. A few weeks ago, I met Dr. Danbi Lee through my work with the Young Adult Stroke Survivors Group here in Seattle. Danbi is an assistant professor of occupational therapy at the University of Washington, and, well, she's awesome. She's working on initiatives to involve stroke survivors with researchers earlier in the research process to provide better outcomes for all, especially around the topic of community reintegration after stroke. At the Young Adult Stroke Survivors Group, we have a library for members, and Danbi recently contributed a recent book, one on which she is one of the co-authors. The book is called Building Better Caregivers, and it's a collection of tools to help caregivers better manage the new situation they find themselves in after a loved one has a stroke, encounters dementia, or has to deal with other conditions that can impact cognitive and emotional functioning. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Kate Lorig, the lead author of the book, and we had a great chapter about the book and about how to help caregivers. Before we get started, I do want to mention that we do talk about a few links, and you can find all of those links over at strokecast.com/Kate. That's the only link you need to memorize, strokecast.com/Kate. Or you could just look for the show notes over at strokecast.com. We do use the terms caregiver and care partner in this episode. The caregiver is the person helping the survivor of a condition, like the stroke survivor. The care partner, on the other hand, is the one with the condition. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and meet Dr. Lorig, who I believe is also the first guest on this podcast with her own Wikipedia page. Dr. Lorig is a professor emerita at Stanford University School of Medicine and a partner in the Self-Management Resource Center. As director of the Stanford Patient Education Research Center, she was a co-developer of the Building Better Caregivers program. For 20 years, Kate watched her mother care for her father, who was severely disabled by a stroke. And we'll hear more about her story in just a moment. So with that, let's meet Kate. So Kate, thank you so much for joining me this morning, despite some of our technical challenges there.
I'm glad you could be on Strokecast, and I'm delighted to be with you all.
You know, I think when we talk about this field of working with folks who are dealing with challenges and often need a caretaker. In my case, obviously, we're talking about stroke survivors as the primary folks I deal with. But why is it that you chose to go into this field?
I actually do a little bit of lots
medicine
of things,
and expertise to begin with.
Caregiving, in one way or another, has been a peripheral part of my life since I was a very young woman. When I first worked in the hospital as a teenager, there was an older woman that was there that had been hospitalized for some sort of dementia. At that point, she basically lived in the hospital. And I felt so very helpless because there was really nothing that any of us could do except care for her physically. And I was too young to try or even to think about doing anything else. And then my father had a stroke in his mid-60s and lived another 20 years, being both physically impaired, although he was able to walk for many of those years, and also having aphasia and not really being able to express himself well. And I watched my mother being a superb caregiver during those years. And then recently I had a 102-year-old mother who died just within the past year. And while I was not responsible for her care directly, I helped support my brother and sister in that.
Wow, that's an amazing longevity. And I think what's really important is that, living, into your 80s after a stroke, living to 102, that is really a testament to the support that.
Well, as I look back on it now, that's very, very true. And then I actually should add that the way I kind of got shoved into this professionally was that about, I don't know, it was probably maybe 8 years ago now, I can't tell you exactly, the Veterans Administration started a new caregiver initiative. And as part of that initiative, they asked us to put together an online course for caregivers, especially for veterans with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And that's where we formally first did Building Better Caregivers. It's an online program which is still to this day available to all veterans who are caring for someone or someone that is caring for a veteran. And that program has been available for many years. And more recently, we decided we wanted to try to see whether we could do this in a small group format as well. So we did a Building Better Caregivers program in small groups, and then wrote the book to accompany that program, but also to help people that for whatever reason could not attend one of those programs.
That's one of the things that is really interesting when we start looking at some of the things that have happened around stroke and TBI these days, is that there is so much more research being done as a result of the wars that the country has been involved in and the resources the Veterans Administration now has to place towards these things. It's one of those things that at the same time is tragic that we've gotten that there is that need, but at the same time, the upside is that there's a lot more research and resources going into understanding these things than there used to be.
The book is a book of tools for caregivers.
Can you tell us what the book itself is about?
It's developed specifically for people that are caring for someone who has had a stroke or has Alzheimer's or has Parkinson's or TBI, things of this sort. And it's to give them a group of tools. And just like any tool, you don't use the tools every single day, but you need to have them when you want them. One of our caregivers said to me, I've had this huge wrench in my garage for years and years and years and never knew what to do with it until one day the water main broke and I had the right tool. And that's what we're trying to do with the book, is give people tools, some of which they can use every day starting now, and some of which they can have in their back pocket should they ever need them. That's a great way of looking at it. It's kind of like those bolt cutters I have stored under my bed at this point. But one of the things I noticed about it is as I was flipping through it, and when we talk about the tools, a lot of the tools that are in there are everything from, if this is happening, this is what you need to do. This is why you need to do it. And this is what you say at each step of this conversation, whether it's running a family meeting to talk about how to get support as a caregiver or how to help communicate with doctors and medical teams to make them more effective in the care of the care partner. And, a lot of it seems like it's not necessarily really super advanced things you need to do, but those basic things that, unless you've done this before, you don't necessarily know. And when you're stressed out, you don't have necessarily the resources to figure this stuff out on your own. So it provides a nice base. Exactly.
And
then the other thing that we're really trying to do, we're trying to do a couple of other things. We're trying to keep the caregiver healthy, because one of the things that we know about caregiving is that it's bad for one's health. And so there's a lot of tips there, and just things like nutrition and exercise and sleep to the caregiver themselves. And then we're also trying to give them tools to work with their care partner. Part of that tools is to think about things in a different way. When our partner doesn't have a stroke or doesn't have Alzheimer's, we kind of relate to them in one way, and we assume that their behavior is caused by their unhappiness or their pleasure or whatever. In fact, very often what happens with someone is that their behavior is caused by the disease or by the problem. And if you look at it as my care partner is just trying to get me, then the reaction is anger. If you look at it as, oh, maybe my caregiver is bored and they need some stimulation, I wonder what would happen if we took a walk. It's the exact same behavior, but it's how the care partner sees that behavior that can make all the difference in the relationship.
It's by way of analogy, it's one of those things where, there are lots of reasons why somebody could have trouble walking, just like there are lots of reasons why somebody could be acting out. They could be having trouble walking because they hurt their leg, or, because they're dealing with hemiparesis, or because they're just tired. And there are so many other reasons why they could be acting out. And it's important to go ahead and look at that and understand, think about it.
Very often care partners have a very limited range of behaviors of which they're really capable. If you don't have brain damage, you have a much broader range of behaviors. You think, well, but care partners are sometimes very limited. And so anger, pleasure, boredom, pain all may look exactly the same. And unfortunately, sometimes folks cannot express what's going on with them. And so it's up to the caregiver to kind of guess, to try some different things, but also to look at things in a bit different way.
And I think what's also really cool, really important too, is the way you're talking about, keeping that caregiver healthy and helping them have the mental and social resources they need to live their life, because an injured or tired or sick caregiver
they can't provide
isn't able to provide the help that they really want to provide anyway.
Caregivers feel, well, I'm the only one that can do this, or no one can do it as well as I can. That may or may not be true as far as being able to do it as well as you can, but you don't always have to have an A+. It may be that you will be able to do better care over a long period of time if you get some help. And yes, that help may not be able to do things as well as you can, but if they do them adequately, so what? And that's what's important, because they keep you healthier longer so that you can keep doing things. And sometimes the help can do things better than you can. I was visiting a friend the other day that finally got some help in the house after doing everything all themselves for a very long time. And one of the things that I realized immediately was the help was much more able to help turn the individual, talk to the individual, was much calmer, and probably in the long run, the person was getting better care with the help than without the help. It's a really hard thing. Caregivers didn't ask for this job. We don't usually grow up saying what I really want to do in life is be a caregiver. And they actually choose the job because there's a lot of people put in a position where they could be caregivers that either walk away, unfortunately we see that all too often, or in some other way avoid being caregivers. So the fact that they are caregivers means that this is something that they have volunteered to do. Even though sometimes caregivers, I don't have any choice. Well, yes, you do have a choice. You may not think you have a choice, but you actually do.
Every day that you wake up and you don't leave, you are making a choice to stay.
I should also say that some of the other tools that we give in the book is we give a whole bunch of tools that have to do with safety and equipment. Because caregivers are all of a sudden faced with all this stuff and people wanting to sell them things. And so what we try to do is give a lot of hints on just gadgets and things that will make life a little bit easier. And again, it's not that you use every one of them. You just need to know they exist so that if you ever need them, you can find them.
You know, when you're in the hospital and getting through all that, they'll tell you, okay, here's the cane you're going to need, or here's the hemi walker you're going to need. And, you know, a caregiver who is plunged into this world overnight, because not only is it something nobody plans to do when they grow up, it's something nobody plans to find themselves needing to do tomorrow. And that's how it can happen.
It's kind of like going from kindergarten to university all overnight. And you can't really expect somebody to do that. So the book is kind of how can the caregiver stay healthy, how a lot of stuff about communicating with care partners and trying to figure out care partners' behaviors and how to mitigate stress, because the biggest problems of caregivers are stress and depression. And those are something that we can do something about, at least very often. And then we also have large sections of the book dealing with such things as how do you get help into the home? Where do you find help? And if you think that you really need to do a placement, what sorts of placements? Are board and care homes appropriate? Is assisted living appropriate? Kind of what all these different things mean. We do some talking about family meetings so that you can get help from family and friends. And then we also do some things around what if the caregiver can't be a caregiver anymore? Who's going to take over? And what are the legal things that you need to have in place? And so, again, we talk about some of the kind of, not in great depth, but in enough depth to get people started so they start thinking of all the legal things that fit around caregiving.
There's a ton of that getting started, and really just a whole bunch of lists of additional resources that they can leverage in, you know, everything from, you know, sites across the web to their personal community and the network of resources that are around them, and how to draw on those resources and work with other folks, because
Absolutely.
it becomes
a lot of people do not know
huge collaborative
that
process.
Every single place in the United States has a thing called an Area Agency on Aging. And all you have to do is look in the phone book under Area Agency on Aging, or look on the web. And the Area Agency on Aging really knows pretty much all the resources in your area for strokes, for Alzheimer's, for caregiving in general. And people say, but I'm not aging. Well, everybody's aging. But if you're not, you know, you can still call your area agency on aging, because the problems, sometimes even younger people have similar problems, and so anybody can call them. This is a resource. It's actually paid for by an agency of our federal government called the Administration on Community Living. And it's a terrific resource. And what I'm saying, unfortunately, people very often don't understand that they really have one in their area. And I don't care whether it's rural Iowa or New York City, there's an area agency.
So we talk about a lot of this collaborative effort. Putting together this book looks like it was a huge collaborative effort as well. I mean, you've got a ton of co-authors listed on this book. And so what was it like working with such a large group of folks to put together this book?
Several books on pain, on living with chronic illness. And whenever we put together a book or put together a workshop, what we always do is we always start out by asking the people that know. And so the way we put these together is we first talked to lots and lots of caregivers. And we said, so what are the problems? Because what we want to do is we want to write books around about the problems that people see and help them solve those problems, not what we as health professionals think they need to know. So that's the first thing we did. And then the second thing we did is we read a ton of books on caregiving and pulled out all the common themes. And then both we had ourselves and we had we had patients go through those lists and tell us which were the things that were really important. So that's the way we ended up getting our content. And then the next thing to do is, I'm certainly not an expert on all these things, is that we got people that were experts in various areas and assigned chapters. And then we read each other's chapters and we edited each other's chapters. And it's a huge effort of passing around manuscripts until you kind of get the final product. I find it, for me at least, something that's very exciting to do, because what I know is we're getting the very, very best information. Maureen Geck, who did the parts on safety, has her doctorate in occupational therapy. I don't know that stuff. Yeah, I could read it in books, but I would not have gotten anywhere near the depth that she got. Marion Miner, who does the things on exercise, was the dean of physical therapy at the University of Missouri. Rob Schreiber, who wrote about the different diseases, is a geriatrician with Hebrew Senior Life in Massachusetts. So we kind of tried to go to real experts in all the fields to get the very best input we could.
One of the things I noticed, and that I was actually a little surprised about as I read it, is that the voice of the book, though, is remarkably consistent from one chapter to the next. When I've read other books that are really compilations and collections of resources from other folks and other places all brought together, that can be really valuable. But when you go from one section to the next, you can tell that it was written by somebody else. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. But in this book, it is remarkably consistent voice. So it really seems like it was assembled by one person writing it.
We give directions to our authors about how to write, and some of them can do it and some of them don't. And then we pass it around and edit it and send it back and pass it around. And I say we because there's probably 3 or 4 main authors where we pass the chapters around between us many, many times. Quite frankly, there's a couple of those chapters that if I ever have to see again, I'm going to scream. I won't tell you which ones.
Sure.
But we work really hard at that. And we get it right most of the time. As I was looking at the book the other day, I was thinking, this could probably be edited a little bit more, but at some point you have to quit.
Sure. Exactly. One of the things one of my high school English teachers taught me, Dennis Vellucci, he used to say this all the time, and it stuck with me.
Yeah,
and that's good writing
very, very
is
true.
Never finished. You can always do more editing. So as we look at what caregivers are doing and newer caregivers, what is one thing that you wish more people knew about caregivers?
Is that they're very, very special people, and they need support. And for those people that are not caregivers, just saying, "What is it? If there's anything I can do, please tell me," is not enough. For people that are not caregivers and don't know what to do, offer something. Can I come and sit for half an hour? Can I bring you lunch? Maybe you really can't tolerate being with somebody that has Alzheimer's. Can I, in that case, is there a way that you can come to and have lunch with me someday? It's to offer, to think of things, to be there, and to be there in the long run. It doesn't mean that you have to be there every day or every week, but it almost means you can put on a calendar and say, "Oh, I'm going to call Aunt Betty every month," or things of that sort. So that's what I would like to say: is don't abandon people that are caregivers. And if you are a caregiver, my advice is know that there's help. even if you think there is no help, there probably is. It's going to be up to you to try to find it. And this is going to make all the difference in your skill as a caregiver and also in your ability to do caregiving over a longer period of time.
You know, when you mention the idea of asking somebody if you can do something specific and coming up with ideas, I think that's one of those things that we're just starting to hear a little bit more about and people talking about, and that the sheer amount of energy it takes to make a decision. And when you say to somebody, what can I do to help? In some respects, you're offering assistance, but at the same time, you're also giving them yet another job of coming up with a list of things that you could do to help. And then they have to filter that and figure out what you can do to help before they actually go ahead and ask for help. So by offering something specific, you address that.
One of the things that caregivers can do is to make a list of things that they would like help with. So when people offers, they can come up with a specific suggestion. And let me give you an example. It's not exactly from the same field, but it almost is. Many years ago, I had lymphoma. And people were constantly saying to me, what can you do to help? And I finally realized it was up to me to tell them. And so my neighbor, who is from another country, asked what he could do to help. And I said, what you could do to help would be to take out my garbage every week. It's not a big task. It's rolling a bin from my back door to the curb. He was delighted to do that. And what's even better is 15 years later, he's still doing it. And he knows he doesn't have to.
Oh, nice.
But it kind of became a bonding experience, and we both know each other a bit better because of this. And I give that as an example because at the time, the energy it took to move the garbage was just something I didn't have. And so it's up to the caregiver, too, to think about things in which people can help. And some of them are big things and some of them are little things. I had a friend just 2 days ago who has been a caregiver and is probably going to have to find a placement for the person that she's caring for, asked me if I would go with her to several different skilled nursing facilities to help her have another pair of eyes. And I said, of course. You know, I have a couple of afternoons. I can do that. It's not my decision, but what she needs is another pair of eyes, and why not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it almost sounds like one thing a caregiver could do is simply sort of maintain essentially a task jar.
Or just think about it.
Help, go pull something out of the jar.
Because there's always things, it may be little things. You know, it'd be really helpful if you could bring me a meal twice a month, or you make a wonderful chocolate cake. Could I have a chocolate cake every other month? It could be little things.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Those little things that make up every day in our lives and can really provide that break. And that's one of those other things too that I found that I've personally struggled with as I've dealt with my own stroke recovery over the last year, is recognizing that it's okay to ask for help. From my caregiver and from other folks, is that asking for help and letting people help you is a way that you can actually do them a favor too.
You're giving them a gift.
People want to help and
especially if you put your request in a range that you know that they can achieve. I mean, if you ask somebody, could you please come and stay with my husband for 6 weeks while I go to Europe? Probably not. But, could you please come and stay for an afternoon while I get my hair done? Sure.
So this seems like a great resource.
Probably
So where should folks go to get the book?
way is to just go to the website of Bull Publisher. It's just look up online Bull Publication or Bull Publisher, then Boulder, Colorado, and everybody that orders a book directly from Bull gets a 20% discount, and they get free shipping.
Awesome.
That's terrific. And I mean, they can, of course, go to Amazon or other places, but I'm just giving them the least expensive way to do it.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any other projects you're involved with that you want folks to check out?
We just released two things that you might want to know. One is we've just starting to give, and it's not very widely spread yet, a new program called Building Better Caregivers, the same name as the book, which is a course which is 2.5 hours a week for 6 weeks. And it is available in a few communities around the country. I think at this point it's available in Detroit and maybe in Cleveland. And the other thing that I think is more important is that for anybody that is caring for a veteran or is a veteran themselves caring for someone else, there is a 6-week workshop online. And it's not just a read and do workshop. It's a workshop where you actually get to talk to about 20 other caregivers that are in the workshop. And when I say talk, this is all done by threaded bulletin boards. So if you have a problem, you can write. You'll get responses. There's moderators. And it's not real time, so you can log on as many times as you want for 6 weeks. To get into that program, which is free, you need to be referred by the caregiver support person at the VA. And every single VA in the country has a caregiver support person. And so talk to the people at the VA, and that's the way you get in the program. And then let me just say one other thing let me give people one other resource, which I know caregivers sometimes have a hard time leaving home. But there are lots and lots of free community programs on living with chronic conditions, on pain, exercise, all of which have been shown to be helpful to people. That is, they're evidence-based. And there's a wonderful website with a program map on it so that people can find them anywhere in the country. And that website is the Evidence-Based Leadership Council. And those programs are almost always free, or they're very low cost.
Fantastic.
So this is not trying to sell anybody anything.
Gotcha. Sure. The other thing I would add too is that, if your partner is going to support groups for their condition, make sure you check in with those support groups too.
Absolutely. Many of the organizations do. I know the Alzheimer's Association does. I know Parkinson's does, and I'm sure many others do as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the main features of the Seattle Young Adult Stroke Survivors Group is we have a 2-hour meeting every month, but after the first half hour, we have a separate breakout just for caregivers, so they can step out into a separate room and talk about their own concerns with other caregivers and get the support that they need, and really get that experience of talking with other folks who are going through the same thing and talk about things they just don't feel comfortable talking about with their stroke surviving partners.
Those sorts of things are just are incredibly helpful for everybody involved. This is going to seem really simple. And that brings us to
our hack of the week.
But it's called Breathe. And that is when things are all going wrong and you don't think you can do it for another minute or you need a break, just stop and take 3 deep breaths. And think about the breath. It's kind of a tiny, tiny mini vacation. And people will say to me, "Oh, what good can that do? All this stuff is going on, yada, yada, yada." And what I'll say is try it. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it again. But just simply taking breaths sometimes is enough to relieve the stress of the moment so that you can continue doing what you're doing for a bit longer. So that would be my tip of the week. Very simple, probably almost too simple, but very, very powerful.
Awesome. Simple and fundamental to everything about life. It's one of the things that the PTs and the OTs kept having to tell me in rehab was to go ahead and breathe.
Well, I'm
Kate,
thrilled to be joining you.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
If I can be of a resource to folks, I'd be happy to do that. I certainly wish you well on your journey. It sounds like you are making the proverbial lemonade out of a really sour lemon, and I congratulate you on that. And I also congratulate whoever is helping you in this journey, because for you to be doing this means that they're doing something right. Terrific.
Absolutely. And Kathy has been fantastic.
Well, if I can be of help, let me know, and I thank you for this opportunity.
So that's it for this week. It was great chatting with Kate about her work and about her book. So I'd encourage you to check out the Building Better Caregivers book over at Bullpub or on Amazon if you are a caregiver or if you are looking for a gift for a caregiver that you know. If you are a caregiver, prepare a list of tasks ahead of time so that when someone asks how they can help, you have an answer ready to go. If you want to help a caregiver that you know, offer to help them in a specific way. Come to them with ideas about how you can assist. When things get stressful, remember to simply breathe. If you're new to Strokecast, be sure to subscribe to Strokecast in Apple Podcasts, the new Google Podcast app, or wherever it is that you choose to listen to your podcasts. Check out the show notes for this episode over at strokecast.com/Kate, where you'll find all of the links we talked about, including the link to buy the book. And, of course, as always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.